Tom Swarbrick on LBC. Text 84850.
0345 6060 973. Let's take a look to what is happening in this shake-up to the criminal justice system. Sexual and violent offenders will now serve at least 2/3 rather than just half of their jail terms. Chris Daw is a QC, a legal commentator and author of Justice on Trial, Radical Solutions for a System at Breaking Point. Thank you for coming on the programme tonight, Chris.
Good evening.
Your view of this change?
Absolute insanity. We have 500,000 cases in backlog in the criminal court system. We have a massively overcrowded prison system already. Every day that people spend in prison makes it more likely they'll commit more crime against more victims when they come out. So it's just piling absolute more misery into a system that's already failing and completely broken. It's soundbite politics of the worst kind, and it's going to destroy communities even more than they have been already.
Why would the public at large not want to see violent offenders serve more time behind bars so they're kept off the streets?
Because when you keep people in prison for longer, you make them more criminal in their behaviour when they come out. So I assume that what the public wants, and I'm one of them, of course, is that there's lower rates of violent crime. And the evidence is crystal clear. The longer you make sentences and the longer people spend in prison, the more violent crimes they commit. So if you're comfortable with more violent crime as a result of policies like this, then vote for them. And some people do vote for them, some people support them. But if you actually want to reduce crime, you have to do something very different. And that's what I'm arguing for in the book. When you look around the world, for example, at the USA, where they have some of the highest rates of imprisonment in the world, they also have the highest rates of violent crime. And the two things go hand in hand together.
But isn't that, that's either a way of getting to the point where you argue don't send people to prison anymore, which you might want to argue, Chris, but it doesn't sound particularly sensible on the face of it. Or you get to the point where you say, well, let's change what happens in prison to get the time with these violent offenders to stop them from being violent.
Well, it's a combination of the two. So 69% of those in prison are non-violent offenders anyway. And we have 84,000 in prison now, which is double the number it was when I started to practice as a barrister 25 years ago. Over half of the prisons are drastically overcrowded and do nothing to prevent reoffending in the future. So the answer is you send many fewer people to prison, and those you do send to prison, you send for a shorter period of time. By doing so, if you have the right kind of prisons, you will reduce the amount of crime in our society, and that's the most important purpose of the criminal justice system.
But how do you tell somebody who says that prison ought to be a punishment that spending less time in prison and having fewer people in prison is punishment?
Well, I explain it in detail in the book, obviously.
Well,
but
I feel like I should read this book, Chris.
I think you should read this book. It's called Justice on Trial. Everyone should read it. It's a very important book. But no, the answer is a straightforward. I've sat down with women who have lost their sons, who've had a knock on the door from the police to say your son's been stabbed to death tonight. I've sat in their living rooms, I've listened to their tears, and I've watched their faces when they tell the story of that visit. The entire reason for the arguments I make is to make such visits by the police less likely. And I've travelled around the world in writing the book. I went to the US, all over Europe. I looked at what works and what doesn't work. And the point I'm trying to make for your listeners is this. If you actually want to see fewer victims of violent crime and fewer murders on the streets, we have to rip up this idiotic obsession we have with sending people to prison for long periods and start doing things that actually work in countries that actually succeed in reducing violent crime, like Norway and Spain and numerous other countries across Europe which don't use prison as much as we do and have much lower rates of violent crime. And the two things are not unconnected.
Just give me the best example you've come across that doesn't involve prison.
Well, in Norway, they use prison almost never for non-violent offenders, and even when they send the most violent criminals to prison, they don't put them behind barbed wire and great big high Victorian brick walls. They put them in institutions that actually look like the real world. They live in housing units that are like ordinary accommodation that you would find in society, and when the people come out of those prisons, even the most violent people, only 20% of them ever reoffend, compared to 75% of those who come out of our prisons. So you just have to look at what works. Pay attention to what works, pay attention to what doesn't, like the United States, which is catastrophically addicted to prison as well, much more even than we are. Which one would you rather live in, the streets of Chicago or the streets of a safe city in Norway where there's barely any violent crime at all? And I know which direction I'd rather travel.
Chris Daw, you're a Queen's Counsel, legal commentator, and I'm not quite sure, but I think you're also the author of a book, thank you for your time, Justice on Trial, Radical Solutions for a System at Breaking Point.